Hi. Hope everybody's doing well tonight. My name is Josh Aho. I'm 41 years old and I'm a graphic designer. In September of 2000, I got my first dog. He was a 3-month-old golden retriever puppy, and I named him Sawyer. But it was 2 weeks after that where everything really kind of took off, and I didn't expect it. On my 24th birthday, I received this book, and it's called 14ers Grand Slam by Roger Edrin. The thing that caught my attention about this book is Roger Edrin had a dog that had climbed all of Colorado's 14,000-foot peaks, and I couldn't believe it. The disappointing part about this book, however, was there was only one small paragraph about that dog, and maybe 4 or 5 pictures of him. But I knew right then and there that's exactly what I wanted to do. Colorado has 54 official 14ers. However, most mountaineers that try to climb all of them go for a grand total of 57 or 58. And I don't have time to explain tonight what makes a 14er official or unofficial. But I can tell you that Sawyer and I were going for a grand total of 61. We were doing everything within question. And this is my book, Climbing Colorado's 14ers with Sawyer. This book took 15 years and 1 week to complete. So from the day that I received this book and that idea was in my head, I started, and that's how long this took. So from 24 to a week after I was 39, quite the quest. And the first 11 years I spent climbing with Sawyer. The synopsis of my book reads, Climbing Colorado's 14ers with Sawyer chronicles the 11-year quest that a golden retriever named Sawyer and his owner Josh went on in attempts to become the second dog-man team in history to climb all of Colorado's 14,000-foot peaks. This book of adventures tells a tale of fun, fear, fanaticism, frustration, physicality, 14ers, and faith. But tonight, I'm going to focus on 3 specific things: friendship, failure, and faith. My friendship with Sawyer began the moment that I got him. And probably for like anybody that has a dog, it would begin through the training and the little walks and those sorts of things. But the bond that we ended up with didn't really begin until about year 3. Because at that point, I was going through a divorce that I did not see coming. I was married as a young man in my 20s, and in my mid-20s, this was something I was not ready to deal with. In fact, it knocked me right down to the ground. Right down. And of all the bad things that have happened to me in my life, that's the one thing I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get up from it. In fact, during that time, my mind went to some really dark places. But there was something special at that time that I didn't really see developing, and it was this, that Sawyer and I were building a bond. We lost our home, lost most of our possessions. All we had left really was each other. And we had to move home and live in my parents' basement for about a year, which was pretty humiliating. When I couldn't sleep at night during that year, and it was quite often, I would get up in the middle of the night and I would take Sawyer to Lake Loveland. I would drive him there and we would walk around the lake, and the goal was just really simple. Just get around the lake, do something positive so that my mind could just get out of this bad place. And those walks around that lake in the middle of winter when it's cold and windy and snowy and you're alone, I didn't realize it then, but it was years later I looked back and I said, wow, that's really where it began. Because people had always assumed as the years went on, oh, I get it, Josh, you guys built your bond on the mountaintop up here. No, our bond was built down here in the pits of life. The sorrow that we shared and the depths of the sorrow that we shared was equal, in a sense, to the difficulties that we would have to challenge ourselves going through the 14ers. And that sorrow that we shared allowed us to build this bond to get to the top. See, what's tricky for me to talk about with Sawyer is I don't know if I know I've never really had the bond with anybody that I had with him. And the tricky part about it is my wife's here tonight, and I love her very much. And my parents and sister are going to watch this video. So if I don't explain this right, I'm going to have a whole crew of people coming after me. But if I was to really explain it the best that I can, it's this. I've never had a relationship in my life where the limits of it were tested at a life and death place. And for Sawyer and I, climbing all those years, 11 years, it was tested every year, life and death. Hundreds of mountains, not just 14ers. And this is kind of a time when I was preparing for this, I was thinking, wow, I could get caught up in like stories of glory, telling you guys about when you're risking your life on the 14ers, how you feel kind of like electric inside. Because in those situations, the closer you are to death, the more alive you do feel. But as I said, those would be stories of glory. And with friendship, there's no room for glory. That has to go right out the door. Because Sawyer trusted me with his life. He was willing to put his life in my hands. And that's the difference, in a sense, from people and animals, because people, we all know this. We can get through situations and not really fully trust someone. But animals, they'll just let you know right out of the gate, I trust you or I don't. And so when you receive that kind of trust from an animal, life and death, it's something that's legit, and it's very humbling to receive. Animals aren't built, I guess, in a sense, to lie to us. In 2009, this would have been several years later, Sawyer and I were very close to the top of Sunlight Peak, but there was a difficult section up there that I thought, wow, I don't know if I can quite get him up this. And it just so happened a couple of guys were coming up the mountain, and it just so happened one of those guys actually was a professional mountaineer. I was never a professional mountaineer. My skill level was the exact same as Sawyer. But what was interesting during this little section that this guy was giving us help, Sawyer didn't want the boost from him. So when he needed a boost, he wanted it from my arms. And then on the trip back down the mountain, when he had to jump off the cliff edge, he didn't jump into that guy's arms. He looked at his arms like, no, that's not the way. He jumped into mine. And as I said, it's very humbling and honoring to know that he loved me and trusted me that much. The friendship and really indestructible bond that we had was really what I think one of the main key factors in all the success that we had on the peaks, because without it, who knows how things would have turned out. Climbing the 14ers involves things like discipline, dedication, determination, focus, drive, inner strength, the ability to keep trying. But again, those would be stories of glory, and while it would be fun for me to spend a night telling you guys that, and maybe interesting to hear, you'd miss the greatest story of all, which is love. And that's the reason that remembering Sawyer and my friendship and the way that I'm telling it tonight is so important. So, why am I going to talk about failure tonight? Because I'm going to spoil the end of my book a little bit. See, I'm a nice guy. I'm not going to make you buy one of my books. I'm not going to tell you can't buy one. But tonight for me is about helping people, not selling books. See, we didn't finish the 14ers. We spent 11 years climbing those things. And at that point, it had taken Sawyer's whole life. His entire life was dedicated to this quest. And we didn't get it. And out of the 61 we were trying for, we got 60 of them. We were so close. And we didn't even get to attempt the last one because at that point, Father Time had wore on Sawyer. His age and arthritis was too far gone. And for me to put him through that climb at that time would have been totally selfish. But to be honest with everybody, to be that close to achieving my dream and not getting it, it was crushing. My dream was within my grasp. It was like I was reaching out for my dream, and as I was closing my hand around it, it disappeared. After all that effort. And if there was one word that I would use to describe my life at that point in time to everybody, it would be this: failure. Failure, really. See, because at that point in time, I hadn't remarried yet, and I had no kids. The job I had at that particular time wasn't very fulfilling, and I let down my best friend, Sawyer. Dealing with failure is extremely difficult because you don't get to deal with it on your terms. There's a lot of moving parts and things are evolving. And failure is something that not everybody wants you to be successful either. So you got to deal with that angle of things when you fail, because those people will show up and let you know. And that happened to me too. If I was to describe failure in terms of mountaineering, I would say it this way. It could be like a large boulder in your backpack, or maybe a pebble in your shoe. See, sometimes it's just so crushing that even the thought of taking that next step is just, you don't even want to think about it. But sometimes it's like the pebble in my shoe. I'll deal with that pebble later. Then you hike all day and you get to the end of the day and your foot's totally destroyed because you didn't deal with it. But if you don't deal with failure, it's always going to linger there. And sometimes those boulders and pebbles wind up back in your backpack and in your shoe, and I thought I dealt with this, and you got to deal with it again. There's no room for failure in this world, none at all. Consider these quotes. I'm sure most of you have heard them all. Second place is the first loser. Champions find a way to finish. It's all for nothing if you don't get the ring. And this last one, this was the big one that really hurt me. I'm sure everybody here has heard this. Winning isn't everything. It's the only thing. And failure doesn't care what age you are or your history or anything. It'll come after you. But there is something amazing I've learned about failure in my life, and it's this. If you actually take the time to stop and turn around and face failure and deal with it and get through it, well, then you can do something kind of cool. You can help people. And that leads me to my last talking point tonight, which is faith. Because if I'm going to be honest with everybody in this room, I did not have the strength within me to deal with my failure. It took faith for me to get through that. See, as someone who believes in God, I have often questioned God, challenged God. God, why did this happen? Shake my fist at him. But trusting God, wow, that was one now where I was really kind of at a crossroads in my life. Because just as Sawyer had trusted me, see, I told everybody here, he wanted that boost from me, not someone else. And when he was coming down, he wanted to jump off that cliff edge into my arms, not someone else. So was I going to give my master the same amount of trust that Sawyer had given his? That was tough for me to think about that. And I'm not some kind of special person by any means. God doesn't like me better than he likes anybody else. And most of the time, again, to be honest with everybody, the amount of faith I've had is pretty much just a mustard seed in my life, just a speck, just enough. But the Bible does tell us, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. And something else that's interesting about the mustard seed is it produces a huge tree. So if the seed gets planted, it allows you to maybe get through things. And I think for me, that was one of the keys to getting through things, is that the seed was planted, even though it was small. And so the piece for me that I started to find in this was, I don't have to weigh out the merits of what I've done in this world. My success, my failure, that's not on me. I can judge my success on His success. And there was something even cooler than that. See, Sawyer's not around anymore. He died 14 months before the book was finished, at the age of 14, in the summer of 2014. But I know I'm going to see him again, and I can't wait for that day. It's going to be a great day. I wrote this at the end of my book, but keep in mind, I wrote this when Sawyer was still alive. And here's what I wrote. Sawyer and I have developed a bond that will never be broken. And because of Christ's victory over the grave, not even death will destroy it. See, this is a true story here as we start to wind down now. There are actually two people on this earth that are named after Sawyer. One's a little boy and one's a little girl. They come from different families, obviously. But the story's really interesting in this perspective. The little girl who's about 2, her parents are super successful people and great mountaineers. Great. They climbed Mount Everest together, the tallest mountain on the face of the earth. So what business do a mother and father have naming their daughter after a dog, let alone a dog that never achieved the dream and was associated with an owner who's branded as a failure? It doesn't really make any sense, because we live in a world where dogs are named after people, not people named after dogs. And yet there are 2 people, at least 2 that I know of, named after Sawyer. And that's where I kind of just feel like maybe God is just kind of whispering a little bit into my life and just saying to me, Josh, you know what? If you want to make a difference in this world, stop worrying about being perfect and achieving all your dreams. If you really want to make a difference, let me make that difference through you. And so now we come to the end. And the way I'm going to wrap this up, I wish I could take credit for it, but I've heard it before, and so I can't. But I will say that it's perfect for this story. Tell someone your successes and build a wall. You might impress them. They might respect you for what you told them, but ultimately, you'll just build a wall. On the other hand, tell someone your failures and build a bridge. And people will say to you, hey, I get it. I know what that feels like. I've been there many times. And for that reason, I just can't help but think that's the reason that God had this quest end the way that it did. Thank you all for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this story.